Hey, everybody. It's Robbie Kelman Baxter with a special guest, Joanna Strober. And today we're going to be talking to you about my new podcast, Subscription Stories, True Tales from the Trenches. And those of you who've been following along might know that Joanna was my first guest. So I thought nothing would be more fitting than to invite her to come and talk to me because she went on the journey with me. So while we're waiting for people to join us and getting ready to get started, I thought a fun thing for us to ponder, actually, it was Joanna's idea, is to talk about how our listening habits are changing during COVID. So, Joanna, you want to take that one?
Yeah, Robbie, I was thinking about that because I used to listen to most of my podcasts on the car, on my commute. That was my place to listen to podcasts. And so I was curious for you whether the way that you listen to podcasts has changed during this time.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that I always say like how I spent my COVID vacation was making a podcast, but not necessarily listening to podcasts. Because I was like you, I think I listened to podcasts when I would drive to clients. I would listen to podcasts when I was traveling, like walking through the airport, waiting for my flight, sitting on the plane. And I don't have as many of those moments anymore. So I was trying to think, like, what do I do? Part of what I'm doing instead is making a podcast, but part of it is, I guess I'm reading more. I'm definitely watching more TV. So yeah, it is changing. But I listen to podcasts before bed. That's kind of my
really?
Yeah. And so Bob and I, well, first I was just listening to the podcasts that I liked before bed. Kind of to calm myself down. I don't know if any other people are feeling this, but I'm finding it hard to sleep or hard to get to sleep. Like I get through my day okay, but then kind of right as I, turn off the lights and get ready to go to sleep, all the worries of both my day and then kind of the bigger worries of where this world is going all come kind of crashing in on me. And I found that having a podcast is actually like something to focus on as I fall asleep. And I love that, that little timer that you can put on.
Yeah.
So
I do think for me, at least, I used to listen to more news podcasts. Now I'm looking for them more for entertainment. I think I'm spending less. I can only listen to so much news podcasts while I'm working or while I'm taking walks. And I've been finding podcasts that are good stories, and I'm listening to those more than I was before. So
really?
I definitely think that I've changed a little bit what I'm listening to.
Yeah. So what are the good story podcasts?
I listened to one called Blood Ties on Wondery, which is a great model for us to talk to about subscriptions. But they are, for that podcast, it's a story. It has really good actors. Josh Gad is on it. It's really good acting. There are a lot of commercials. And if you want to not have the commercials, then you pay for Wondery. And then you can listen to it commercial free, which I think is really smart. But this is their second season, and the story is great, and it's entertaining, and I look forward to that coming out every week.
So it's almost like TV. It's almost like
very much like TV.
It's scripted fiction with great production value.
Yes, exactly. So I didn't used to listen to that for podcasts, but now I think it's great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been noticing. What I have been doing, if I'm not listening to podcasts, is learning about podcasts and reading about other people's podcasts. And I joined this podcast group on Facebook. And what was so surprising to me is, like, I sort of just assumed, I guess we all go through our lives doing, I certainly do, that, everybody else was going to be just like me. Like they were all doing it for work, and it was all sort of business topics, and it was all, interviews and helpful things for people in their work life. But I'm definitely in the minority. Like most of the people have lifestyle blogs or lifestyle podcasts, or like what you were talking about, the scripted podcasts, music podcasts, comedy, religion, spirituality. There's some adult content, sexuality podcast. Like it's such a mishmash. It's like there's just an explosion anyway in podcasts, which like I had no idea, because I always go to just my, the 8 podcasts that I like to listen to. By the way, if you're tuned in, please share what podcasts you like. I'm always looking for new ones to learn from. And it's fun to see what people are listening to.
So Robbie, what made you want to do this podcast? What got you excited about making a podcast?
Well, I listen to podcasts, and I've been listening for a long time. And so that was kind of the first thing, is that I was like, could I do this? But it sort of seemed like out of my realm, like being a gymnast or, painting. Like it just seemed like something I couldn't do. And then I started seeing more and more people do podcasts. And then at the same time, when I've launched my books, I've been a guest on, over 100 different podcasts.
Wow, really? That's amazing.
And I started looking at them, and some of them are so impressive, and, the sound quality is so great, and the questions are so provocative and thoughtful, and they're so prepared. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. It's like, these more professional. And then there were others where I was like, wow, the person seems pretty relaxed, and there's no producer, and there's no, they didn't ask me to do anything special. They were fine with my, lousy little, earbuds or whatever I had. And I thought, wow, maybe I could do, like, I started asking people, like, how hard was this? How did you do it? And I started to read about and ask people, like, how did you do it? And just sort of in the back of my head thinking, maybe I could do this. And then, of course, once you think you could do it, then I'm like, well, what, kind of like with writing a book, which I know you also did. Like, and then you're like, well, wait, now that I'm listening to all this and I'm learning this, I'm like, I could do this, but then what would be my content? What would make it worthwhile to do? And so it's been about 5 years, I would say, that I've been sort of thinking maybe I could do a podcast. It's also a huge commitment, because the one thing that everybody tells you about a podcast is if you start it, you have to care and feed it. Care for it and feed it for, forever. Like if it's once a week, it's once a week. If it's once a month, it's once a month. And like, I don't know what happens if you don't do that. If the podcast gods shoot you down, but that was very scary. So that was kind of, so it took a long time. So it wasn't what made me do it. It was like what got me over the hump, to finally do it. And what held me back a lot, and me really well, is that I was afraid it wasn't going to be good. Like if I don't have a good topic, and I don't know, and I'm not a good interviewer, and I don't, I don't figure out the technical stuff, which was very intimidating, this won't be worth listening to for people. And then I will have wasted time, but it will also be sort of embarrassing to, put something out there that's not good.
Yeah. You and I are in a book club, and I think half the people in our book club have written books, right? And there's something about, there's something about seeing other people that do something and take that plunge that make it much more confident to do it yourself, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. So wait, we have a note in from, somebody in Chicago. Congratulations on your new podcast. I listened to the following podcasts: The Art of Consulting, good one. HBR Idea Cast, great one. And then LinkedIn Hello Monday, which is with Jesse Hempel, which I love and I listen to all the time. So wow, we have similar taste.
And what do you think makes those good? What?
I think, well, so like HBR IdeaCast, let's break that one down first. And I was just on this one, which was kind of a life goal of mine a few weeks ago. And I just realized, like, the production, I keep talking about production quality. Let me break this down. Okay. It sounds clear and good. The interviewer is completely prepared, and there is no fluff. Every bit of it is like a good question with a crisp answer, right? Any bit of conversation is interesting. There's no like, let's ease into it. There's no rambling. I mean, I ramble, when somebody asks me a question, sometimes it takes me a while to get to the point, or maybe I don't get to the point. When you listen to an HBR IdeaCast episode, it starts in the place you'd want it to start. It answers the questions that you would have asked if you'd had the wherewithal to ask them, and it ends in 27 minutes.
Okay.
And so I like that. And I think that, a lot of the guests have something specific to share. They're not like, they generally, unless you're Oprah, they're not like rambling general, tell me about your life and your journey. They're like, okay, you have, like, my husband, Bob, always complains about, some of the other podcasts I like, more of the the meditation, spirituality kinds of, on being. And I like the 10% happier one. And, he listens to those and he's like, these people, they just ramble on about stuff that they're not experts on. Like, I want to hear the expert on meditating talk about her meditating techniques. I don't want to hear her talk about, what she thinks about COVID or what she thinks about, the world of podcasting. And I think IdeaCast is very, very focused. Hello Monday, which is a LinkedIn one. I like it just because she asks very good questions and she's very approachable. But I'm sort of curious if other people listen to this, or the person who put this comment in, what you like about those podcasts, because I really like them.
Yeah, some of them that I listen to, they spend too much time at the beginning bantering. I'm like, no, get to the point.
Yeah.
I'm not that interested in their banter.
Right. You have to be really good at banter to banter.
Yeah.
And something that I'm finding with my new podcast, I think I've recorded 11 episodes, and like I've realized, I have great guests. They're really smart, really articulate. I almost always delete the first question that I ask and their answer. Because it's almost, it's just funny. Like, I've realized I'm not Terry Gross,
right.
I'm not Kurt Nickish from IdeaCast or Jesse Hempel. Like, I'm not a professional interviewer. And for me to get into the interview, I kind of have to say, like, tell me about yourself. Tell me how you got here. Tell me a little bit of background. And sometimes there might be a snippet, but a lot of times it's just rambly, or what they tell me about their background is not relevant to the subject. Like, if I'm talking about subscriptions and I ask you to tell me about yourself, talking about, I don't know, how much you love to ride your bike and how that's always been a really important part of your life. Like, that's not, like, you didn't edit right. I guess that's what Barbara Kingsolver said that, that writing fiction is about, you have an empty patch of garden and you're trying to figure out what to put there. And writing nonfiction is about having a huge tangle of weeds and trying to pull out as much as you can so that what's left is actually beautiful.
I like that. Okay.
I know, I thought that was good, but I felt like, I feel like I'm putting a lot of weeds in and then I have to pull them all out.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about the new guests that you are thinking about inviting, what are you looking for in a good guest?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the first, well, there's some sort of different kind of categories. Like, one of the things about having a podcast is you want people to want to listen. And, I talk a lot in my subscription work about how you have your headline benefit, which is what gets somebody to join you in the first place. And then you have your engagement and retention benefits, which is what gets them to stay. And having a podcast, where my goal is obviously to get people to subscribe, often the headline benefit that brings them in for the first time is the title of my podcast series. So I agonized over that, and the guest's name and the company where they work. Right. So, if I think, wow, if somebody doesn't know me, but they see that Joanna Strober, founder of Kurbo, weight loss, program for kids, digital weight loss program for kids, and senior VP at Weight Watchers, is going to be on the show talking about her subscription, I don't know who this Robbie is, but I like that. I'll go listen. So having a guest who might attract people on their own is something that I think about. But then that retention benefit, that engagement benefit, just because you have a good title or you work at a cool company does not mean, A, that you're personable and easy to talk to and articulate, and B, that you're going to tell the truth in the interview. So one of my biggest fears, and this happened a lot when I was doing interviews for my book, is, you get so excited, like, oh, I'm interviewing somebody from, fill in big name company that does subscriptions. And everything is like, you've done a lot of media training. I know, Joanna, the 3 points, right? Like, it doesn't matter what question you ask, they come back to, we have this new feature.
Yeah.
And you're like, that's not interesting. And like me, I'm not a journalist, right? I'm not an investigative reporter trying to catch your mistake or catch you in a lie or make you look stupid. I really want to make my guests look good, but I also want them to share something that is not readily available already. So I'm looking for a guest who's willing to share more. So for example, people in public companies, it's harder
Right.
than interviewing somebody who owns their own business or works in a private company or a closely held family business, because they're more limited by what they're allowed to say.
Interesting.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right. And also there may be a PR person around them saying, you can't say XYZ.
Yeah. Some of my guests bring their PR person to the interview.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And, and it's fine because, like I said, I'm not trying to trick the guest. I always give my guests the rough cut recording to say if there's anything that you don't like, whether it's because you don't like it because you don't like the way you sound, or you don't like it because you realized you said something you shouldn't have said. I'm going to pull it. I'm going to edit it for you. So it's not like I'm trying to trick you, but at the same time, I think my listeners want to know, or at least if I were listening, what I would want to know is like, what are your metrics? What is your onboarding? Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I hear you. I was wondering if that was me or you.
No, it was me, and I don't know why that happened. But there are bumps in the road, and that's what's interesting in an interview.
Right.
That's what you want to hear. And so finding a good guest is sort of a combination of, can they bring some audience? Like, is it interesting enough that somebody would tune in just for them? Are they articulate and able to share their story and relevant? And are they going to be somewhat candid and they're something that is useful that they haven't said 5,000 times everywhere else? So sometimes it's better to have a less famous person who has a better story than somebody that's really well known, but where you're going to get like there's certain famous people that are on the podcast circuit, and they say the same things in every interview.
Right. Well, I'm thinking back to our interview, and you asked me some hard questions, and I was like, do I really want to answer that in a podcast? And do I really want, how there is a little bit of tension, right? Because when you're doing the podcast, it feels very personal. It just feels like you and I are talking, and you do a really good job at asking interesting, hard questions. And then for me as the listener, as the talker, I have to go, that's a good question, but how do you want to answer that? And is it a public answer? I think you do a very good job at asking the hard questions, which is what makes the podcast interesting and why I like listening. And then as a guest, you're like, am I comfortable enough? I guess you're like Terry Gross in that way, right? Terry Gross always asks, really.
Well, that's my phrase. I'm all done. Can I quote you? Yeah, Robbie Baxter.
Exactly.
You're like Terry Gross. Okay, I'm done.
But you listen to her, and she just asks people questions, and she's lulled them into feeling comfortable, and then she asks them really hard questions, and then they answer them. And I think that's fun.
So I got some coaching from a woman I know who's a very experienced podcast producer, where it's her job, and she produces kind of high-end, business podcasts for coaching. And she's been listening to my podcast episodes and giving me feedback. And actually, while I love what you said, she told me that I don't ask the hard questions. She said, you're sometimes too nice to your guests and you let them off the hook. You don't ask the follow-up question to say, hey, I don't understand that, but what do you mean? Or you didn't really answer. And it was interesting because now I'm listening to them again. I'm trying to pull quotes out and trying to figure out what the kind of key nuggets are. And it's embarrassing. I mean, I guess it's like anything. When you're new to something, you have no idea what's good. And then you start to learn what makes it good. And then you start to see how hard it is.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Interesting. And when you think about where you think podcasting is going, how big do you think it's going to be? How do you envision the podcasting world kind of going forward?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but what I do know, or what I'm noticing, is there's still so many new entrants every day to the world of podcasts. Number one. So there's just an explosion, kind of like, I feel like it's almost like saying, like, what do you think is what do you think is going to happen with websites? Or what do you think, like a few years ago, what do you think is going to happen, with apps, right? And you're like, well, there's a lot of them. So I'm no longer unique just because I haven't, like, there was a period, you remember there was a period where just having an app was like a differentiator.
Right.
I remember making a list of the Fortune 100 and looking at every single one of them to see if they had an app and then what kind of app they had. And a lot of them
didn't have apps, and a lot of the apps they had were really stupid, right? Like they told you something, like an oil, like a Shell or a Chevron had, this is how many barrels of oil there are in the world, and you're like, who would want to have that on their phone with them wherever they go? But at the time they were experimenting. They're saying, well, what's unique to us and what information do we have? And I think it's the same with podcasts. Like right now we're realizing that, anybody can make a podcast, right? And on that podcast community that I'm on, there's a whole group of people that literally do everything on the cheap, don't edit. Like they're just like, I interview someone that I think is interesting, or I just talk about something that I think is interesting and I put it out there, and like, and so there's that. And then at the same time, there are, big time movie producers and professional, well-regarded actors who are creating scripted podcast. Like podcast is just it's a package, it's a packaging, it's a channel for content. And so anything that can be content could be a podcast. So I feel like we're just going to get used to this, where we get to a point where everybody, in the same way that everybody knows how to stream video content, have Netflix or Hulu, I think everybody will know how to use podcasts. Like my mom is just learning how to use podcasts because of my podcast, right? She's not a regular consumer of podcasts, but I bet you in 2 years, she will be.
Yeah.
So
one thing I'm learning right now is how to buy advertising on podcasts. And
for
Kurbo, and it's really interesting to understand how it's a pretty nascent world, buying ads on podcasts and understanding which podcasts would be effective for you, what their audience is, how many downloads they have, like the conversion of them. There's a bunch of questions that we just can't, that are just really antiquated, as opposed to buying on Google, right? Where you get all the data and it's totally a data-driven buy. Right now, buying advertising on podcasts is not a data-driven buy. It's a lot of just testing and experimenting. So I actually think there's a lot that's going to happen there that's going to evolve there in the next few years, so people can monetize their podcast better.
Yeah, that's a big, like one of the things when I was looking for a podcast host, not to get too technical, because I don't know if people are interested in that, but you have to have a podcast platform so that it goes out to all the different podcast players. And there's a lot of different podcast platforms. And one of the things that differentiates them is that some of them make it easier for you to take ads. They have I forget what they call it, dynamic something or other, where, you put a spot in your podcast, and if you don't have an ad, then it just, you don't notice the break, but it's a nice enough break that if you do have an ad, you can pop it in there. And that the ad isn't kind of hardwired into your episode.
Okay.
That makes sense. So that, if I hardwired an ad from Kurbo and I said something like, summertime is a great time to think about your health, try Kurbo, and then you listen to that episode, you don't discover my episode until next year in January. You don't want to hear that. And Kurbo wouldn't want that, because it would, And so anyway, that's like a thing that some platforms don't do dynamic ads. So once you pick an ad, you're done. So it's been kind of, it has been interesting. Wait, I just want to post this. Hold on here. So I mentioned Kurt Nickish from Harvard Business Review IdeaCast, and he was listening. So he said, thank you for the kind words. Really my favorite. I'm not just saying this, but it is my favorite business podcast. So let's see, somebody else, I'm just going to put one other comment in, Joanna. As you mentioned, the podcasts get right to the point and you don't feel you want to leave, and they keep you looking forward to the next one. So I have a question for you, Joanna. On the scripted podcast that you're listening to, do they have a teaser for the next week?
Yes, always. Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They do the scripted ones in particular, right? Those are really they're really well done. There's a lot of money going into them, and they know how to get you back. They're very much like a TV episode, where and then you have to wait till the next week. It's so painful. You have to listen. You have to wait for the next week unless you pay. It's so smart.
And what happens if you pay? You get it earlier?
You get it. You can listen to the whole thing at once. So if I would listen to for free to this, I have to listen 1 week at a time. If I pay, and I have to listen with a lot of ads. And if I pay Wondery, the app, then I get it all at once and I don't have to listen to ads. It's exactly your education about freemium and how you can use both free and paid. I've learned a lot from you.
Wow. That's really interesting. I'm thinking about my own podcast now and how to do that, because I do know who the next guest is going to be. And at the end, again, I know we've talked about not getting too much into the technical, but I do find it interesting. You have your main body, the interview, right? Welcome, Joanna. We talk. Thank you so much, Joanna, right? That's the interview. But then there's an intro and an outro for that episode. Like, today, my guest is Joanna Strober, who's really amazing, and she's done this and that, and we're going to talk about this and this and this. And then at the end, I say, that was Joanna Strober. We talked about this and this and this. If you want to learn more about Joanna, go here. And please, if you liked what you heard, please, subscribe, rate, and review my podcast, right? But I could, in the outro, say, next week's guest, Brad Handler of Inspirato, talking about luxury vacation clubs.
So I actually think what they do is they play a little piece of it at the end of the next one. They don't say, here's what's coming up next. I'm trying to think of how they do it. I think they play like a little teeny clip from the next one. But I have to, in my mind, I'm hearing Wondery, woo, and I don't remember exactly. I'm trying to think about how they did it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I got to think about that.
I'm hiding out in my bedroom because everyone in my house is on meetings today, and
really?
The sun is moving, and so I keep on trying to move away from the sun.
Oh, the sun! I thought you said your son. I'm like, yes, he's moving.
No,
he's
my son.
College.
No. The sun here is moving, but yes, I am hiding in a bedroom. That's something I need for video podcasts, right? For podcasts, no one sees you, so you don't have to worry so much about how you look. But for something like this, you have to be more prepared. That's kind of an interesting one, right?
Yeah. Well, you know me. I mean, I invested in these big lights,
right?
Partially because I'm at home at my home office all the time, and I'm on screen a lot, and I create a lot of video. But partially because of COVID, I was like, okay, screw it. I'm just going to get the good lights. And I'm so happy, right? That like I always have this good lighting, but
I know I'm in the shadows hiding out in my bedroom because the house is taken with other people talking on the telephone.
Oh, well, I appreciate you making time, and I know how busy you are. So I'm glad
this is so fun. Yeah. I love your podcast. I am learning a lot. I mean, you've been working with me for a long time. I mean, Robbie was really very involved as we started thinking about the subscription model at Kurbo and how to design something people would love and want to stay with and stick with. And that was your advice to us was invaluable. And then through the years, as you've learned more about subscriptions, I feel like I've gotten to learn more too from you. And so I feel like your advice and your thoughts as they have evolved have really helped my evolution. I say now I would never start a company without a subscription model and a forever transaction. And that's all. A lot of that is learnings from you.
Oh, that's nice. It's nice of you to say. And it's been fun. I mean, doing the podcast, you asked about guests, and I've tried to have guests with really different stories and very different perspectives to give, because I mean, we've talked about this a lot, that I believe that you can learn more by looking outside of your own industry at what other companies are doing and kind of bringing it back and saying, well, what would this mean for me? So lots of people do that with Netflix, and they're like, well, I want to be the Netflix of the weight loss industry, or I want to be the Netflix of the ice cream industry, or I want to be the Netflix of, insurance. But, when I'm thinking about guests, I want to have big companies, small companies, startups, family owned, nonprofits, companies that are transitioning to subscription, and companies that have always had it. And it's hard because you want to have this variety, but it's sort of hard to think of who's that right person. But you were definitely the right first person for a lot of reasons.
Well, it was really fun. I really enjoyed doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's fun because we went to a studio to do it, and we actually, like, I've only done it that one time in the studio where we went up to the Commonwealth Club. We were in a real studio. We had 2 sound engineers. And it felt really special too.
Right.
Like we felt very well cared for. And it was fun. It was really, and having a really good friend who's also been, you've been such a good friend for such a long time. Plus you've been a client. Plus I've seen Kurbo.
Exactly.
I've seen Kurbo since the very, very beginning.
Exactly.
So it was really fun to go back down memory lane with you.
So great.
Yeah. So I think we're out of time. Thank you for being my guest / interviewer / first guest on my podcast Subscription Stories. If you want to find Joanna, I just had her link up to Kurbo. You can find her at kurbo.com. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, you, Robbie.
Joanna.
Have a good day.
Bye. You too.